Devour feculence. It means eat shit, Mr. Drummond.
I've been hearing a lot of people criticize episode 9 for not giving them any answers. And let me tell you, if you feel like you're not getting any answers, then you're probably asking all the wrong questions. Is Jame Eagan a freak? Is Mr. Drummond actually Ricken's brother? Is Miss Cobell Helena's mother? Well, believe me, we will answer everything, because this episode was absolutely incredible, full of amazing performances, meaningful imagery, and poetic parallels, both visually and narratively. If you're watching this video, that means that you too are starving for answers, so let's get into it immediately. Let's start with Dylan's story first, because well, it involves pineapples.
Was a pineapple involved?
So Gretchen recently cheated on Dylan's Audi by kissing his innie. Essentially, it's the same body, but different souls, and therefore I'm definitely on Dylan's side. We later see Dylan's innie madly in love with Gretchen, and he's even made a ring out of his beloved perks and lumen stuff to propose to her. However, she's there to break up with him. The pain of falling in love for the first time and then losing that love is so unbearable that he decides to end his existence. I wonder if love and hate actually transcend severance, and if the fact that Dylan was already thinking about ending his innie's life seeped through. Gretchen leaves and Dylan is going through so much.
Gretchen!
He has a very hurtful talk with Helly, who by the way is also in love. What's interesting is that Helly tells Dylan,
"You should keep it. Give it to someone you meet down here."
because that's what she believes will happen to her and Mark. So in her mind, it's already a probable outcome, which is heartbreaking in itself. This theme of innies and outies being the same beings is explored throughout their entire conversation, and we'll revisit this when we get to Helly's part of the story. Later, we see Dylan submitting his resignation, having a talk with Mr. Milchick and Miss Huang, and waiting by the elevator in the perfect spot. Perfect enough for him to look like a betrayer to Kier. Now the painting behind him is called Kier Pardons His Betrayers, done by Danny Aviles. Danny has done incredible work for Severance, from wonderful illustrations to storyboards or even the map of Wolf's Hollow. I bring this up because he has a post on his Instagram with all the different iterations of the painting. And in all of them, the idea of the sun's light shining down on the figures is very much present, symbolizing their readiness to be quote-unquote pardoned, if you know what I mean. Now if we were seeds or plants or even let's say pineapples, pardoning a pineapple would look like taking the crown off the top and planting it in water or soil. The idea of water and soil ties back to temperature. If you live in a frosty climate, it's best not to plant them in soil because pineapples are super sensitive to the cold, just like Lumen's environment. So the idea of sunlight being present in every iteration of the painting makes so much sense. In two versions, the four heads are literally in the soil, but the final version is the one that appears in the show, and if you think that's where it ends, well, you're not ready to hear what's next. Listen, we're just getting started because do you remember the frame in Miss Cobell's house from season 1 that said, "We must be cut to heal"? Well, this phrase pops up again in a new teaser posted by Lumen Industries on LinkedIn.
Never underestimate the resilience of the human mind. After all, we must be cut to heal.
Not only that, but we see it again when Harmony is going through Sissy's Shrine of Kier with slightly different wording. It says, "You must be cut to heal." I can't shake the feeling that this isn't the end of Dylan's story, and not in a good way. Not because his outie decided his innie should cease to exist, but because of the horrors that Lumen still has in store for him. Dylan was broken, not just by Gretchen, but by Miss Huang too. There's been tons of water references surrounding him, all his characters involving swimming, water, or scuba diving.
First date, let me guess. Scuba.
Thai food.
Nice.
Though you did take scuba lessons last year.
Yeah? Which sea?
It was in a pool.
Okay.
And then Miss Huang just happens to play the ring toss game right after Mr. Milchick tricks his innie into meeting Gretchen in the first place. There's also the file names of him, or the dialogue about him cleaning the waters. Let's just say he's kind of obsessed with water, or maybe Lumen is. I don't know. Let's move on to Miss Huang. Miss Huang has just finished her Wintertide Fellowship. Not because she did great, but because Mr. Milchick really wants her out of there. And the final stamp of approval, well, that comes from him, the manager of the severed floor. There's a disturbing visual here. Jame Eagan literally covers her mouth while she speaks. It's an unsubtle poetic way of saying that anyone who speaks out about Lumen must be silenced. But the most insane thing, well, Mr. Milchick says,
Your bed will be moved from your parents' home to the Gunnell Egan Empathy Center in Svalbard, where you will work to steward global reforms.
now hold up. We had no idea that Gunnell Egan existed in the first place, or that Miss Huang has a really weird name, or on top of it all, that she's supposedly going to do global reforms. Now, if you recall, global reforms was just a total lie told to Mark by Mr. Milchick to keep him working at Lumen. So I'm thinking, what if this whole thing about Miss Huang is actually a scam? And I'm wondering where she's going, because at this point I'm just worried about her safety. And yet, her bed is being moved. Well, Ricken, of all people, suggested this exact ridiculous idea in season 1, when Mark slept over at their place.
Thanks. I still don't quite get the 3 beds.
Right.
Oh, Ricken's colleague told us that switching out the beds as the child grows can wound that child.
Irreparably. But if you provide said child with all of its beds upon birth, you allow it to progress across the room at its own rate.
Coincidence? I think not. Miss Huang leaves at dusk, with her childhood totem broken. This makes me wonder, what did Miss Cobell have to give up to end her fellowship? It's finally time for Helena. We see both versions of her in this episode, but let's start with Helena first. We get a glimpse of their mansion, her morning routine, and how she takes her eggs, which is massively different from Keir Egan's favorite breakfast of 3 raw eggs and milk, and thank Keir it's different.
I wish you'd take them raw.
Despite the voyeuristic creepiness of Jame Eagan,
I'll watch.
we feel how uncomfortable their home is and what Helena has been enduring her entire life. He also mentions Cold Harbor, which, spoilers alert, is not gonna get done. And then we see Jame and Helena meet again, but as different people. They also discuss Irving and Bert, which we'll get into a little bit. That's pretty much for Helena's part, but meanwhile, Helly is dealing with Mark's absence for the past 2 days, and Dylan's hurtful comments only reinforce that she can't escape Helena. They are the same person and she cannot run from herself. She finds a distraction, a little side quest, but it doesn't work. Instead, she gets jump scared by Jame Eagan, and before the jump scare, we hear the testing floor elevator. Now I know what you're thinking. This must be Miss Casey, and the sound must be from Miss Casey's episode, where Mr. Milchick stops her at the door. But based on the setting, timing, shots, and the timeline of the episode, it cannot be Miss Casey. By my estimation, Miss Casey's event happened at the start of this week, and now we're heading into the weekend, so everything between episodes 4 and 9 has happened in about 3-4 days, with the events of the Orthbo being of the weekend. With that in mind, we also see Dr. Mauer with a black band-aid on his head from an injury. This means Miss Casey already used the elevator in an attempt to escape before this moment, which means Jame Eagan might be using the testing floor too. Are the 6 pieces of Helena's eggs this morning foreshadowing different Jame Eagan innies? Is a Jame Eagan at breakfast the same as the one at the Eagan family gala? Or has he finally found out that the OTC was happening at the family gala? I'm so curious to know your thoughts and theories on Jame. Is he actually severed? Why is he so creepy, and what the hell is going on with him? Please let me know in the comments. Now, speaking of his creepiness, we get into the birthing cabin storyline. I prioritized all the other stories, but now it's time to address the giant bee in the room. Mark has been going through reintegration, but apparently reintegration is a process, not an instant. We kind of already knew this, but our understanding of PD and how Mark's been having distorted visions made us believe otherwise. Or at least that's what I've been thinking. Either way, understanding that reintegration doesn't happen instantly confirms that they indeed needed to visit the cabin to connect with any Mark, rather than an integrated Audi Mark. What I find very odd is how Innie and Audi Mark are constantly battling each other in the reintegration process. Pay close attention to how Mark's voice changes in this very dialogue when he's talking to Mr. Milchick.
I'm not sick. I just needed the day, okay?
May I ask why?
No, I've just got life stuff.
Adam's got brilliance in voice control and how he manages the difference between Innie and Outie Mark have been very clear in the show. Even PD brings it up in season 1.
Are you following me? Your voice is different here. Worse.
Once they get to the cabins, Miss Cobell says a bunch of weird things. If you're confused by the title of the episode or her words, that's completely okay because everything in this bit is a reference to the episode 34 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone. There's an incredible amount of references and parallels here, which I will save for another video. So if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. But for now, let's focus on the task at hand. Then she says that
She's one of James. No one's to know.
This confirms a few things. Quote unquote one of confirms that there are plenty of women who have been giving birth to James' bastards or offsprings or whatever you want to call it, but also the fact that they're usually scheduled. Now, this might just be confirmation bias, but the fact that Jame Eagan does this regularly confirms that we're not insane to think that Mr. Drummon might be James' bastard.
And Father approves.
Father encouraged it.
And or that there is a reason we've never once heard a mention of Helena's mother throughout the entire show, which is absolutely bizarre. Now, did you notice how Cobell, despite not having children and being an engineer, just happened to have an incredible amount of knowledge about lactation to the point that she faked being a lactation consultant so successfully?
So, you're like a nurse or something?
There are superwomen everywhere, and I'm not in any way, shape or form denying that. But a woman as busy as her would barely have time for side interests while her focus has been on Severance for years. Unless she was doing this as a side interest connected to Severance itself. And or if she had to raise a child as a nanny and not as a mother. Now, if you're interested in what I just brought up, I'm just gonna let you know that I'm working on another video, putting together all the evidence regarding this very topic. So stay tuned. But for now, let's move on from Cobell.
He even drew blueprints.
One last comment before we move on from the birthing cabin. I just wanted to point out that I find it so fascinating that Devon is a younger sister to Outie Mark, while she's an older sister to Innie Mark. It really puts things into perspective regarding their age and behavior and how the Innies are literally just grown children with minimal understanding of the world and how it works. Mr. Milchick's story is straightforward. Now, who is this diva? Seriously, his performances are wonderful and there's no word to properly describe them. If you've been following my videos, you would know that I've been talking about the Mr. Milchick and Natalie situation for quite some time now. They've been heavily oppressed, controlled, and disrespected. They've exchanged quite a few moments, but could not discuss their issues more clearly. Rightfully so, I was expecting a full crash out by either of them. But since we saw the paperclip situation and also the presence of big words, I knew something like this would happen. So he starts the day by tending to all the other businesses, as we've already discussed him in the other stories, but what's unique to him is his conversation with Mr. Drummon.
Devour feculence. It means eat shit, Mr. Drummond.
Which, much like Dylan, is positioned in the very same light, with his head shaped as a betrayer and Mr. Drummond's head positioned like Kier's. There's much to consider here, especially given our talk about the painting and the important presence of sun in all of them. I cannot stop thinking about what he will face because of this behavior. Because Lumen has no limits, so I'm desperately waiting for the next episode. But before we move on from him, I want to shine some light on his conversation with Mark. I believe that this conversation was kind of his wake-up call that he's taking things too far and we might get what we've always wanted, and Mr. Milchick that actually helps the Innies. I saved the best for last. Irving and Bert. Is their story over? I hope not. Will we see more of them? I don't know. You might remember my video on Evil Bert. We had already discussed all the implications and details on why Bert was actually working for Lumen right after the events of episode 6. To be completely honest, I wish I could tell you that their story wouldn't be over, and Severance is the sort of show that would at least finish storylines and answer all the questions, but unfortunately that is not the case. There are still many unanswered questions regarding Irving. His story, his life, the reason he severed, his investigation, and who he was calling. And on the other side, we only got half-baked answers about what Bert is to Lumen.
Lumen goon. That stings.
As we've previously discussed, we knew that Bert was working for Lumen, but we really didn't know to what extent. Now it's clear that Bert was to Lumen what this driver is to Lumen now, which makes a lot of sense as to why Miss Cobell turned back on that one scene. If I had to guess, I would say that Bert was Jame Eagan's driver, which absolutely lines up perfectly with Helena's age, Field's timeline of 20 years, and how Bert severed only a good 7-8 years ago.
With Lumen, it's very specific language.
As Bert said, it's always very specific language with Lumen, so he probably wasn't even labeled as a quote-unquote bad person, which would make sense. As a cult, you would expect them to glorify their own, not the other way around. So I can understand why I feel like their story is incomplete. My significant other and I cried for them, and how poetic it was that they were both willing to sacrifice their lives for the other person. Bert was doing so by setting Irving free and risking his life, and Irving by accepting the consequences only to feel love for the first time. It would be such a disappointment if this was the last time that we ever heard of them. Thank you so much for watching. I'm ending the video here before I get teary-eyed again, but I will be coming back with more videos very soon, so if dissecting Severance and going to deep dives of interesting films and TV shows is your thing, then make sure to subscribe and like to help me continue this thing. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, take care and stay safe.